A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The EU taxonomy is a cornerstone of the European Union's sustainable finance strategy. It provides clear definitions for economic activities that are environmentally sustainable and protects private investors against greenwashing. It also has a key role to play in allowing us to reach our climate objectives. To reach our Paris Agreement targets, we need to see more consistency at the global level in how we identify what is sustainable. Climate change is global, and so too are financial markets. We need to come together and look at how tools like the EU taxonomy can drive market alignment. So I'm happy to be introducing today's event on this important topic. On the road to net zero, we all have a role to play, and I'm sure everyone here takes their responsibilities, both collectively and individually, very seriously. And that's why we're all part of COP26. We're committed to decarbonising the economy. Policymakers, companies, financial institutions and citizens, we all need to take coordinated action if we are serious about tackling the global climate crisis. Public funding has an important role, but it will not be enough to reach climate neutrality. We need the full power of the private sector behind us and with us. For finance to flow to where it's needed, international policymakers must work together to build coherent sustainable finance rules and strong architecture for cooperation. And this is something that we are deeply committed to here in the European Union. We've put in place an ambitious sustainable finance strategy that works for us, but we developed it with an eye on the global context. We've learned a lot over the years as we've developed our approach to sustainable finance, and we want to share this knowledge with the global community. So we are active in all international forums on sustainable finance. We launched and chair the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. The changes we need to make to our financial system will not be easy, but they are absolutely necessary. The EU Sustainable Finance Strategy offers a supportive framework for all sectors at each stage in their journey to reduce their negative impact on the climate and environment. It prioritises a transition that is inclusive, bringing along in particular small businesses and citizens. And it will make the financial sector more resilient to climate risk, while enabling it to participate fully in the transformation of the economy. The EU taxonomy is the centrepiece of this strategy. As I said earlier, the taxonomy provides clear definitions for economic activities that are environmentally sustainable and protects private investors from greenwashing. It helps companies to plan the transition with clear parameters, and it helps investors to provide financing where it's most needed, enabling us to reach global climate goals. In the EU, we're also using the taxonomy to develop other sustainable finance tools, like the European Green Bond Standard. Our aim is to boost transparency and mobilise finance for activities that are on a credible pathway towards sustainability. So that's what we're doing within the EU on taxonomy. But as I've mentioned, we're also thinking and acting globally. As part of the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, the EU is working with our fellow members on a common ground taxonomy report. The EU is also contributing to the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group as a knowledge partner. And here in the EU, we know that the taxonomy offers opportunities for companies and financial market participants to increase transparency, reliably measure sustainability in financial instruments and business activities, plan ahead and report on their progress. But we also know that convincing other countries that the long-term benefits of taxonomies outweigh the initial cost is not always an easy task, which is why our work with the International Platform is so important. We want to highlight the benefits of taxonomies that reflect local realities while making sure they are comparable internationally. We are making good progress on this through international forums. And I hope that conversations over the course of COP26 will accelerate work in this area. If you take one thing away from my remarks today, I hope it is this. The EU is committed to developing globally comparable and usable sustainability tools, including taxonomies. And we will cooperate closely with our partners in international forums to make this happen. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great discussion.
Hello.
Good.
I hope everybody can hear me. Bertrand de Mazière speaking from the European Investment Bank. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say a few words. I'll be short on actually the way to implement this regulation that we just heard about, and in particular, the famous EU taxonomy. This taxonomy has already acquired some reputation for being a bit complex. And so I'd like to give you an example on how to implement it as we do it at the EIB group, with the hope that it can serve as some sort of a lead to facilitate more the implementation of this regulation and more sustainable investments. First of all, at the EIB group, we take the EU taxonomy as what it is meant to be, which is a game changer for decisions by markets on how to allocate capital to activities that make a substantial contribution to climate and environment objectives. And one of the reasons this EU taxonomy can be a game changer is its particular clear and granular criterias um, that are based on science and also are consistent with the 1.5 degrees temperature goal. We see that this taxonomy, which is a key part of the European Commission's renewed sustainable finance strategy, we see this as a part of a holistic new system for markets. It is holistic, first of all, because it addresses issuers, it addresses uh, investors, it enhances comparability, it provides some certainty to them, and it is meant to facilitate the dialogue on green investments. It is holistic because it applies to the whole investment chain, directly linking sustainable finance with the real economy, both public and private. Finally, its holistic nature makes it, I would say, spreading to other parts of regulation, and notably the EU Green Bond standard proposed by the Commission requires the alignment of the use of proceeds with the EU taxonomy. The EIB Group has strongly supported this initiative, initially as an observer of the Commission High Level Group on Sustainable Finance, later as a member of the so called TEC, the Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance, and now the EIB Group is continuing this support as a member of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance and also via the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. Finally, it is fair to say that the taxonomy is still work in progress and subject to extensive development work on usability. But to be a work in progress is for a new toolkit of this magnitude not abnormal. It just indeed makes it, I would say, in need for early test cases. Early market signals on global relevance of this taxonomy are rather encouraging. There is indeed um, a lot of mapping of common ground that is taking place, and the EIB is particularly interested in the uh, first a cooperation, the development of a cooperation between the United Union and China. We are particularly interested in this at the EIB because we did some early work between EIB and PBOC 4 years ago. It is indeed vital that there is, how should I say, cross-border and intercontinental understanding to allow cross-border and intercontinental capital flows for sustainable finance. I said that taxonomy requires test cases, and here I will speak more directly of what EIB, as the EU Climate Bank, is doing. You know that the EIB pioneered the green bond market with the issuance of our first climate awareness bond, the CAB, in 2007. We also started a sustainable bond program, the Sustainability Awareness Bond, or SAB, in 2018. And at the moment, we remain the largest multilateral issuer of such bonds, although we are no longer the largest issuer of such bonds globally, because this market is developing, and in particular, as you know, the EU and sovereigns have now issued large volumes of such bonds. In our Climate Bank Roadmap 2025, which is a bizarre way to call our actually climate strategy, we at the IB Group state the plan to align our tracking methodology for green finance with the EU taxonomy regulation and to target green finance, a share of green financing in our annual finance to target a share of 50% by 2025. Of course, the remaining 50% of EIB financing must also be environmentally and socially sustainable and meet our Paris alignment commitments. Speaking of Paris alignment, I'd like to highlight that the EIB Group is adopting the do no significant harm criteria in the EU taxonomy for climate change mitigation and adaptation, and we adopt it as a minimum for our Paris alignment approach, although in some specific cases, as laid out in our strategy, in our roadmap, we may set a tighter performance level. An example is with our emissions performance standard for electricity generation. When we retain a target floor, I would say, of 250 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour, which is slightly more stringent, but actually quite in line and similar with the taxonomies do no significant harm criteria of 270 grams. We will also reflect the taxonomy alignment of EIB via the gradual extension of our CAB and SAB eligibilities. And for this, we aligned our bond documentation, we linked our bond documentation with the evolving EU legislation on sustainable finance, including the EU taxonomy regulation, and we were the first institution to establish such a formal link between the documentation of its bonds and the EU regulation. This will allow, again, the extension of the CAB and SAB eligibility in par or in parallel to the development of EU taxonomy. And already earlier this year, we extended the SAB eligibility to projects contributing to the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. And we recently added also the access to social and affordable housing to the eligibility of SAB proceeds. So we will continue this adaptation, and we explain also how we'll do that. We explain that in particular in our latest published in September and October and available on our website, our latest CAB and SAB frameworks. These frameworks describe our strategy in detail and disclose, in particular, the technical screening criteria that we apply for the definition of a substantial contribution of the allocation of proceeds, comparing these criteria we're using to those proposed by the TEC when it is possible. And we rearranged also a framework to suit the template of the EU Green Bond standard as proposed by the TEC. These frameworks were audited with independent reasonable assurance by KPMG. And again, I invite you to consult them on our website. We hope that in that way, we can provide a reference to other stakeholders, and we be sure that we aim to apply the taxonomy in both lending and borrowing, and through our external audit processes and through also our reporting. Thank you very much, and enjoy a fruitful discussion with today's panelists.
I'd like to thank Bertrand de Mazières for his remarks just now, Director General of Finance at the EIB, and also, above all, our hosts at the European Commission, who opened this session with a keynote by Commissioner McGuinness. My name is Peter Monroe from the EIB. I will be your moderator for today's panel. And one further thank you, of course, to our hosts for the COP26, the United Kingdom. And before we delve into the panel, may I introduce briefly the panel themes and the panelists? And in doing so, I think it's important to acknowledge some of the themes that have been raised in the two opening statements. First, Commissioner McGuinness emphasized, and I quote, that the taxonomy is a cornerstone of the EU sustainable finance strategy. This underlines its importance. She also mentioned the clear definitions as a tool for market alignment and consistency, and interesting also her emphasis on international comparability. She also said change is not easy but necessary. To pick up on Mr. de Mazière's statement, I would like to acknowledge his point that, in his view, the EU taxonomy is a game changer for decisions by markets, that it will help us to channel capital towards activities that make a substantial contribution to climate and environment. In other words, from these two opening statements, we hear that the EU taxonomy brings pivotal definitions and environmental performance criteria to markets. Now, in this panel, we also, of course, will look outside the EU, and I'll now begin to introduce briefly the perspectives of our panelists, which are very broad and rich. Outside the EU, the taxonomy is being closely followed. It provides a uniquely granular official benchmark for markets and other emerging taxonomies, and guidance as part of that on transition pathways. In other words, taxonomies are becoming a global phenomenon. Now, how does this specifically relate to our panelists? Well, we are privileged to be joined from the European Commission by Elisabetta Siracusa from DG FISMA, who have been driving the development of taxonomy. We are also joined by Dr. Daming Cheng from CICC, an expert on the development of taxonomy in the Chinese market. And these two perspectives are highly topical as we hear that the EU and China are in the forefront of developing a common ground taxonomy, notably at the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. But what does this mean for financial actors? How can we translate the taxonomy into action on the ground? This is also an area where our panelists can shed light on practice. From the corporate sector, José Luis Blasco from Acciona, a former member of the TEG, is a pioneer in reporting taxonomy alignment. From the development banking world, we are joined by Carol Cronenberg from EBRD, an EU platform participant and expert on taxonomy criteria. As we discuss how taxonomy can help to channel institutional capital towards sustainability, our colleague Nadia Humphreys from Bloomberg will be in the panel, and she is also one of the leading lights of the EU platform offering cutting-edge expertise on taxonomy data questions. And for full disclosure, from my perspective, I'm also privileged to contribute to the EU platform on sustainable finance, as well as being part of the Green Bond Principles XCOM. So bringing essentially a debt capital markets perspective alongside the broader EIB perspective. So that's the end of the short preview. And if I may, I'll just summarize some of the points you may hope to hear discussed in the panel. So regulatory initiatives to develop and apply taxonomies, how we will facilitate sustainable investment and transition using such tools, looking further at the criteria and the disclosure and the benefits for higher level aims such as the NDCs, above all questions of implementation, usability, and also international development and cooperation. So before we go into the panel, I would like to say we are very privileged to be joined by Nathan Fabian, who is chair of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance and, in his day job, Chief Responsible Investment Officer at the Principles for Responsible Investment. So over to you, Nathan, for some remarks to electrify the next section of the panel. Thank you.
Hello, Peter. Hello, colleagues. You have ample technical expertise on this panel, so I would just like to give a couple of broader framing thoughts. We saw on the finance day at the COP yesterday a huge amount of capital announcing commitments to manage for 1.5 degrees. There was 130 trillion of assets under management. Now, investors are clearly saying they're willing to prioritize environmental performance in their investment decisions. But of course, this raises the question, where should they invest? What level of environmental performance is good enough in order to realize these goals of 1.5? And this is where taxonomy plays its role. The broad opportunity of taxonomy is to bring forward the investment for a clean economy by helping the markets to understand future goals and what they mean for environmental performance today. Now, if we look at the European energy system, we know that the Fit for 55 package implies average emissions of around 100 grams of CO2 equivalent gases per kilowatt hour by 2030, just 9 years away. So if we're contemplating criteria that are meant to signal environmentally friendliness for assets over, say, 2 decades, we need to be mindful of this number. And so the numbers matter. And we must look forward when setting criteria and not back, because we're now looking forward at our goals. And of course, the broader issue here is if we're going to use our capital markets to meet the goals, if this is our main way of trying to reallocate our economic activity, we need there to be trust and integrity in these markets. Now, there are challenges, and I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts, Peter, to guide the panel. We must be mindful that if we're relying on our capital markets, we cannot inadvertently encourage investment into what could become environmentally subprime assets. And then we must remember that we're hardwiring these disclosure requirements into our financial regulation. We must avoid systemically mislabeling investments as environmentally friendly when we know they are not, because the maths and the science is there to guide us on this. Now, this gives rise to a specific challenge which might be of interest to the panel, and that is how to consider the environmental performance of assets that are not environmentally friendly, but still play a role in economic transition. Now, these are largely the fossil fuel technologies across energy, manufacturing, transport and buildings, and agriculture, of course. And we must concentrate on how to describe the environmental performance while these assets play a role in transition. The platform, of course, is focused on the use of an amber category, not green, but amber, to describe this important issue. That is something that we still must resolve, and there's fine-tuning to go on this. In addition, and finally, the question of how criteria sit in transition plans with targets and sectoral policies. Taxonomy is but one tool. We need many for our financial transition, and how taxonomy criteria are used in these broader transition plans matters greatly. Peter, I wish you a good panel.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for that very thoughtful and important contribution. And with that, we are going to just get a profile of the audience with a couple of Slido questions. Now, I'm relying on my colleagues from the Commission to activate this. You'll see the first poll now available. You should see a link at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. And if you click on that, you will be able to vote. The first question relates to the geographic focus of our participants. Now, we'll give this a moment, as I'm sure participants will take a second to get through the link and to find the poll, and we'll see how that runs for a moment. We'll have in a moment also a second polling question, so we only have 2 questions. It's really just to help us understand a little bit who's in the audience and whether or not you are a taxonomy user. Now, we're starting to see some results. That's very good. I'll give it another moment and wait for my colleagues in the Commission to decide when they want to cut the poll. I still see votes coming in. We've got, certainly some people have found it, so I think the link is working fine. You should be able to go to the link and quickly make your choices. Let's give it another few seconds. I can see the numbers ramping up now. So just to repeat, first question, what is the geographic focus of your activity? So we are trying to understand where our audience is active. Getting very nice number of participants now, some quite granular data. Let's give it a few more seconds, I would say. Okay, it's still creeping up. Okay, I think maybe we're at a point, I'll invite my colleagues at the Commission to bring, there we have the result, very good. So for those in the audience at the moment, the majority have their activities focused more in the EU, although we have a significant group of around 20% who really are global in perspective, and also a significant number who are focused outside the EU. So this shows that we have a rather a relatively global audience, but let's say when we say EU, I think we probably can say Europe. I'm not sure if the outside EU is now also including our British colleagues. Maybe we should have phrased that a bit better. But let's move on to the, could we move on to the next question, please, Commission colleagues? I think we're getting the feel there. So question 2, are you a taxonomy user? Are you expecting to contribute to or use a taxonomy in the next 12 months? Okay, I'm just looking at the head count. Head count is still quite low. I think we need to wait a little bit for this to really reach the levels of the previous question. The previous question, we had a large number of votes. I think we're almost half as many votes as the first question. We need to wait another moment, I'm afraid, to get a more meaningful representation. And that's interesting. We have a picture emerging now. I think we may get a few more votes. It's very evenly split here at the moment. Those who are expecting to use a taxonomy and those not. So interesting that in this poll we're discovering that we have, let's say, some active, an even split between active taxonomy users and those who are less familiar, maybe less familiar with taxonomy or not yet deploying. So I think that helps our panelists also to frame their remarks and to understand that we should not be too technical in some of our comments, but rather, anticipate, let's say, future adopters, potential future adopters of taxonomy or those who may use it. So thank you very much to the Commission colleagues for that excellent Slido poll. Now we will go directly into the panel questions. And this naturally brings me to the first topic, which is about implementation and usability of taxonomies, and in particular the EU taxonomy. The first question is to Elisabetta Siracusa, the European Commission. So I've got a relatively broad question, which is broken down as follows. First, the why. Why have you elected to create a taxonomy? What was the strategy and the benefits behind that that you anticipated? Also, a second related point, what do you see as the challenges and opportunities in implementing taxonomies? And what will be your next steps? Elisabetta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you for this very articulated question. I think Commissioner McGuinness made a very eloquent presentation of, in particular, the why. Why do we need a taxonomy? A taxonomy is a fundamental pillar of our sustainable finance strategy. And our sustainable finance strategy, as you know, dates back to 2018. So I can say without fear of exaggerating that the European Commission and the European Union is very much an early taker in terms of sustainable finance. And of course, such strategy takes a long time to develop, takes care in developing, and taxonomy is a very good example, because the taxonomy itself was adopted in 2020 and a lot of work went into it, of course. But I think it is fair to say that we realized very early on in developing a strategy that to have an effective approach and to have a concrete approach to a sustainable and climate resilient taxonomy, economy, the taxonomy was not a nice to have, was must have. And this is what we've been working on. Of course, the taxonomy, I should underline, is one of the pillars of our sustainable finance strategies. The others, which are very closely connected, has been underlined, by the way, by other speakers, are disclosures on one side and other instruments such as benchmarks, standards, and of course, green bonds. And especially, I'm very grateful to the remarks made by Bertrand de Maizière, which are very, very interesting, of course, I think for the audience on green bonds. Now, in this context, what is specific about the taxonomy? What makes the taxonomy so fundamental for us? Well, it is because it establishes a common language between companies on one side and investors on the other. And in this context, it constitutes the real connection between the real economy and the transition that the real economy must undergo, and in fact is undergoing, and investors. This common language is fundamental for this purpose. And really, this is what I want to underline. This is what of course, Commissioner McGuinness underlined herself. So this connection, the fact that both the real economy and investors can speak the common language and can on that basis make decisions as far as companies are concerned on their transition plans, and as far as investors are concerned is where they want to invest, and how these two aspects, both from the point of view of companies and from the point of view of investors, relate in general to our policy objectives, to our climate and environmental objectives. So what are the challenges, you asked? Well, there are many challenges, of course. Some of them are specific to the European Union, because the way the taxonomy, of course, works in the European Union is that there is a basic act adopted by the co-legislators, the Council of Ministers, and the European Parliament, and the European Commission develops the technical parameters in so-called delegated acts. And this is what we're doing at the moment. We have developed a first delegated act on climate mitigation and adaptation, and this is still ongoing. The process of adoption is still ongoing. And this is a challenge which is specific to the European Union, but there are challenges which are specific to all taxonomies. The fact that taxonomies to work need to be solid and based on scientific criteria. And the challenge which has been raised also by Bertrand de Maizière, the question of usability. And I think these are questions that are, of course, we are facing at this very moment, but will be typical of all taxonomies. Now, what do we want to do for the future? Well, for the future, we will continue to develop our technical criteria, which, as I've said, we've done for climate, and we will do this for the 4 other environmental objectives, which are water, circular economy, biodiversity, and pollution. So those are big next steps. But if I just may recall, as Commissioner McGuinness recalled, we will be working on taxonomy and on other tools based on 4 big principles. First, everything has to work for the transition, has to help the transition. Second, everything we do, we need to be inclusive. We want small and medium enterprises and citizens to participate as well. Third, we will be looking very carefully at the resilience of the financial sector itself. And fourth, and this is why we're here today, we will always keep in mind that just as climate change is a global challenge, all solutions need to be global, and this is what we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Next question is to Dr. Chang. So if we can broaden the perspective a bit, what learning points on design and usability do you draw from your long experience of developing green finance criteria and related measures such as incentives, for example, for the Chinese market? Dr. Chang.
Hi, sure. Green bonds has been developing in global markets for over last 15 years. Global green bonds has grown rapidly from $3 billion new issuance in 2012 to close to $300 billion in 2019, 100 times growth. It has become one of the most important investment category in global markets. In China, we also have experienced the faster growth of green bonds market. The total outstanding of green bonds in Chinese bond market mounted to about 915 billion RMB by this year, and average 200 billion RMB new issuance each year in last 5 years. So the announcement of a carbon neutrality target by the leadership of the Chinese government boosts a faster pace of growth in green bond market. We expect 600 billion RMB new issuance this year. Meanwhile, we do see outstanding issues and challenges in the green bond market. Prior to this year, Chinese bond market has separate green bond standards and taxonomies from the global markets, including European markets. Even within Chinese bond market, different regulators, including Central Bank, PBOC, National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, the China Security Regulatory Commission, CSRC, and the NAFMI, all of them have their own green bond standards and taxonomies. Obviously, we do see difficulties for the market's participants to use these different taxonomies to identify and monitor the green bonds for their investments, especially across different Chinese bond market. So in April this year, we do see the release of the latest green bonds endorsed project catalog 2021 by PBOC. This catalog, which is the Chinese taxonomy, unifies and set clearer definitions and standards for our green bonds, which is conducive to a more standardized green bonds market in China. For criteria for a standard taxonomy, it has to be unified definition, unified standard, improved project classifications. So those are the key points or key takeaways from the development of the Chinese green bond market ourselves over the last 10 years. So those are key points that we need to learn for creating this new environment, for creating the regulatory environment for the Chinese green bond markets, to boost the Chinese economy. So and a lot of organizations and people are working towards the more unified standards and more unified taxonomy to connecting Chinese and EU bond market. So I will talk later about that. So those are pretty much what we have seen, what we have done, what we have learned from the Chinese bond market.
Thank you very much for those insights, Dr. Cheng. And that question about a unified approach, but also recognizing the need to cater to the subtle variations that may be needed in different markets is a very important observation. And that brings me to a question for Carol at EBRD. So EBRD already has also experience of introducing policies in relation to taxonomy some time ago. So could you share with us what we can learn from your experience, and specifically, again, why use taxonomy? You know, what links should we see to higher objectives such as NDCs? And then on the how do you see taxonomies being used by the market and yourselves? And could you perhaps include in that a few lessons from the field, from your practice, and how taxonomy has impacted the way you do business? and if that can give us any lessons internationally. Carol, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you for the organizers to enable me to speak here. As people know, the EBRD is a multilateral development bank. We are both active inside Europe, but most of our activities are outside the EU. And I would like to answer the question in that respect. What is important for the EBRD is, well, first of all, if you look at the taxonomies play an important role internally. The EBRD has endorsed a green economy transition approach, basically meaning that 50% of our finance needs to have substantial contributions towards the environmental objectives by 2025. And of course, just also was said by Nathan, we need to be able to determine what is green and what is not green. So that's already, I would say, the very simple application of taxonomy, but it's an internal rule. Up till, I would say, we have already been applying taxonomies since 2010, because we always had green objectives. But these taxonomies have really become, I would say, far more complex and far more detailed with the introduction of the EU taxonomy. And what Nathan said, I do agree that the EU taxonomy is the most detailed, and in that respect also considered as a gold standard in taxonomies in the world. But it imposes, of course, a bit of a challenge for the EBRD, mainly operating outside the EU, that the application of EU taxonomies is challenging, and the reason that this is challenging has to do with a number of reasons. The first reason is the EBRD is a private sector focused organization, so it's very much also about what can we do with our clients, what can we do for our clients, and if you look at how the market is responding to it, then I see that the clients are kind of worried because they are worried about upcoming reporting requirements related to taxonomies. They think about resources implications, and clients also, I would say, underestimate the implications. And that is very much what Nathan already said, is that we have to be careful not to water down criteria, but on the other hand, the taxonomy makes extremely clear the amount of challenges that lay ahead for us to basically tackle the climate change aspects in our countries of operation. Well, if you look at how are taxonomy used in the market, I think that's an important question. Well, first of all, it is a very important tool to set targets and to set ambitions. That can be done both on a country level, but very much also on a company level and organizational level. It is used as of course, as a reference, what is considered green and what is not green, like we do internally, what I just mentioned. It's not mentioned so far, but it is also a very excellent tool for monitoring and reporting. Specifically, the criteria that are being set out in the taxonomy basically give us the KPIs that can be applied for different sectors in reporting progress. And furthermore, you also see I would say a lot of innovation going on now in the financial markets, in green instruments. Let me mention one instrument, a sustainability-linked bonds, which are basically related to outcomes or impacts of bond investments. And I just mentioned the KPIs and the criteria that are laid out in the EU taxonomy can be serve as a very good basis in the market to introduce these instruments. But let me summarize. If you look at our country's operations, mainly the emerging and developing markets, we are not there yet. We are not there yet that it is being accepted as a full-blown taxonomy set out. Of course, there are also local issues, specifically when we look at SMEs and smaller companies that have a very much a regional footprint. there, I would say the urgency is not being seen so much, and also it's a matter of very much of capacity building. But what we do see is that in terms of starting point with companies, the EU taxonomy gives a very good, I would say, language and starting point in having the discussions, and also bringing sustainability considerations in the business and business plans. So that's I would say I see a very important aspect in the market, also on why and how to apply the EU taxonomy.
Thank you very much, Carol. Interesting to learn about this important foundation role of the EU taxonomy. Jose Luis, could you extend our understanding by drawing on your very deep experience of taxonomy design at the TEG and how you translated this into reality with your pioneering disclosures according to taxonomy? So perhaps you could explain what was your experience of implementing taxonomy, challenges, benefits, what lessons would you share with those embarking on this great adventure? Jose Luis, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me, Peter. Let me show one example. Yesterday was the presentation of the new initiative for international sustainability standards at the FERS here in the COP. The fact which shocked me was the accountants were saying that they will translate the current mess of acronyms for sustainability accountancy to make it understandable for the society. You can imagine accounting saying, "Don't worry, we will translate it to you." This gives me the opportunity to introduce that the application of the EU taxonomy is easy, but needs some work to understand what is and how to use it beyond the reporting exercise. And this is the first takeaway that we had. We need to learn, to teach, to understand. And because the first difference is the team we need to establish is different. We need to have the accounting and the technical expertise. We're working together, studying together for a better understanding, and to establish this, that it is not common in the companies, that the financing team is working so isolated to the sustainability and the technical, together make a great combination of knowledge for the new situation that we are living as a companies. The second is to understand that the relevance of taxonomy is not reporting exercise. It's not a reporting exercise. For the corporate side, maybe for the banks, this is an strategic information, and the value you will find in the taxonomy, the value for money, is depending the value of the transformation that you want to make in your company. Because they give you, the taxonomy gives you the opportunity to have an independent scientist sit at the same table saying how your market will look like in 10 or 50 years. We finally decide to tackle the climate crisis. You can listen or not, but it will be responsible to your shareholders to take decisions today. The less interest you have in changing your business, the less useful and more complicated you will find the taxonomy. This is our takeaway. In the business line that we have more resistance is because, okay, you don't want to change, don't worry. And the third takeaway is to understand that taxonomy is not a beauty contest. This is another barrier. It's not important to have high numbers. Do not be obsessed with that. It is a tool with different purposes. The CapEx, the future investment in the low carbon economy are important, but what is really important is don't invest in taxonomy eligible assets that do not meet with the taxonomy criteria. It's equally important because eligibility is key. Inside the eligibility to meet with the taxonomy criteria is the important thing. But the problem is not when you are aligned. The problem is when you are not aligned. And the revenues that is look at the present probably will not say so much for you because the companies are not managed by business sales, but their contribution to EBITDA. Yeah, another metrics related to the delegate act that are not mandatory in the Article 9, that could be very useful also to use in order to manage. Don't be framed by the regulation. Look beyond what is the ultimate purpose. But the most important lesson learned is that to develop an internal sustainability taxonomy is simple and useful for companies who want to be part of the solution. If you will want to be part of the solution, you have a great guideline for your strategy. Like everything in life, it is hard to get people to study, but almost 30 years working in this field, in my profession, I found the taxonomy one of the most useful and powerful tools to steer a company in the right direction.
Thank you, Jose Luis. Time is running, and I thank you for your very succinct and powerful intervention. It's easy, not just reporting strategic value indicator. It's not a beauty contest. I think these are interesting lessons to take away, that it really helps you to be part of the solution. This brings me to Nadia at Bloomberg. Could you please share your views on how this works in financial markets? Who is impacted? What are the earlier lessons on adoption? And how do you see the future evolution? And in particular, perhaps you'd like to share what you've learned from Bloomberg customers, who really are a kind of litmus test for financial markets. And what is their interest? What is their level of focus? And perhaps looking further ahead, if we look back on this in a few years' time, will we say, oh well, taxonomy is really something which will be regarded as business as usual? So Nadia, over to you.
Peter, thank you so much. And thank you very much for inviting me to this panel today. I think important topics for us to discuss. I also want to acknowledge that I think in your starting vote, about 50% of the audience weren't necessarily familiar or users yet of the taxonomy. So maybe just in framing my answer to your question, the EU taxonomy impacts many actors. So that could be a producer of cement, aluminium, a producer of renewable energies, and equally a financial organization, so a bank or an asset manager. And until very recently, being environmentally sustainable basically meant that I am performing better than my peer group on a set of environmental metrics. Those metrics may not necessarily be applied consistently when you start to look at financial products that claim environmental sustainability. So what the EU taxonomy does, and obviously I will echo the thoughts of my previous panelists, is very good in that it defines what is good or what is environmentally sustainable. And then it asks companies to report against that in terms of these primary KPIs, as they're called, so the proportion of turnover, capital, or operational expenditure that meets these taxonomy criteria. So where you are substantially contributing to one of 6 environmental objectives, but equally doing no harm to any other. Now, a financial organization can take that data and use it in their way of explaining how a financial product itself is environmentally sustainable. So Peter, maybe to answer your question in terms of what I see in my day-to-day job within Bloomberg. So there has definitely been a ramp up in terms of clients wanting access to data. But I think there are probably 2 main use cases that I'm observing right now. So one, as Jose Luis was saying, is to meet reporting obligations. So they want to be able to pull through financial products and understand the proportion of the underlying investment that is taxonomy aligned. Now, I've noticed you've got a couple of questions coming through in terms of whether it's only EU or non-EU. And the clients that come to Bloomberg definitely want to see whether the EU taxonomy criteria can be applied to international companies. And because they're metric-based, it absolutely can be. And then the second piece of that I'm seeing is clients that want to innovate around the taxonomy. And this is really interesting. So they want to structure products, embed taxonomy into their investment workflow. And that's definitely an encouraging sign in terms of financing the transition, which Nathan called on in his earlier points. And finally, really, I think what I'm hearing the main concern right now is that companies aren't necessarily all compliant with the taxonomy. And that is the uncomfortable truth of today. not all companies are in that substantial contribution bucket. Some of them are kind of in the mid space. So what's a really important data point, and certainly one that we see our clients engage with, is how near or far a company is from achieving substantial contribution, and how a company is trending over time to demonstrate that they could be taxonomy aligned. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Nadia. That's really very important that we understand that it is a source of innovation and it is guiding the journey towards substantial contribution. Now, we're conscious that time has really run away with us. And so we will have to be very, very brief on our second question. For those of you who have asked questions in the chat, and there are quite a lot of questions, I think the only realistic way of getting back to you is in the chat. Otherwise, we will not have time to answer your questions. So that leaves me to invite the panelists to each give their quick sort of 30-second take, 30 to 60-second take on the second topic, which is really the international development of taxonomies and how that can help transition. So if I can maybe begin with Elisabetta, how are you working to align the taxonomy? Who is internationally, and who is advancing on this to create common ground?
Thank you very much, Peter. I think this is really my cue to talk about one of the elements that have been published today and have been very welcomed, and notably this morning at the meeting of the international platform, and that is the Common Ground Taxonomy report. Now, in 2 words, really, because you asked us to be brief, what is the Common Ground Taxonomy report? Well, it's an analysis exercise. It's an analysis on approaches of the EU taxonomy and the China taxonomy, and of the methodology for comparing and identifying commonalities and differences between some features of the 2 taxonomies. And I want to underline, this is really an evolving tool. So, and I have to say, it is the first work of its kind. It really is, I think, something that is worth looking at. And I hope it can provide a very good analytical foundation for all those who are interested, of course, and can help future developments in comparability and interoperability. Just 2 more observations. One is the connection of this work with the work that has been done in the context of the G20, and in particular, the Working Group on Sustainable Finance, to which the international platform contributes as a knowledge partner, and has contributed with a very well received document on taxonomy. So I invite you to look at that. This is one thing. And second, where do we go from here? As I said, the Common Ground Taxonomy report is an evolving tool. And in the future, what will need to be looked at, and it's already in the cards, on the cards to look at these other areas, will be possibly additional sectors, additional environmental objectives, because this is focused, the current analysis is focused on climate. In the future, we will need to look at other environmental objections, considerations on transition, which was mentioned more than once today, other eligibility features, which were also mentioned today, such as do no significant harms, or minimum safeguards or social safeguards. And of course, the most important thing is to really work with other jurisdictions and look at what other jurisdictions are doing in developing their own taxonomies. So I invite you all to look at this Common Ground report analysis, which is really worth looking at. It's a very important analytical tool that has been developed. And of course, as I said, it's open to further development and to evolution, because it is essentially an evolving tool for all to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. We're unfortunately very short of time, but I would invite the other panelists to each just give 2 words of reaction to those developments, perhaps beginning with Dr. Cheng.
Sure. I think currently we already have the common ground taxonomy published today. And congratulations, first of all, and along the way of the development of this common ground taxonomy, a lot of people, a lot of institutes contribute to the development of this CGT. For example, EIB proposed the mitigation criteria in high-level expert group report, which reflected the conclusion of a white paper on the need for a common language in green finance, which was a great initiative. And Tsinghua University contributes a lot to this work. And finally, we have this common ground taxonomy. I think for a practitioner, for a frequent user of this taxonomy in capital markets, CICC and we do think that this common ground taxonomy is like, how to say, convention. It's like a convention of international civil aviation. The function is similar to that. We are safe flying cross-border using this convention. So now we have this convention. This is the importance and the significance of this CGT. And now we do propose that we can consider, for example, now we have this CGT, we can use that for first flight. For example, EIB, for example, can consider issue panda bond in China using CGT. And at the same time, one of the primary Chinese issuer, for example, Agricultural Bank of China, ABC, at the same time to issue Eurobond in the European market using the same taxonomy, CGT, at the same time. So that's my comments from that.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Thank you, Dr. Cheng. I'm not sure if we have time for a quick remark from Nadia, Carol, and Jose Luis. We'll see if we're stopped by the clock. Nadia, do you want to come in still?
I will be very brief. I think the worst outcome would be many different frameworks, incredibly complex to operate internationally with globally capital markets. I think the best outcome is common metrics. I would want to see, if I'm looking at production, ton of carbon relative to ton of product on the mitigation objective, ton of carbon relative to kilometre travelled on transport, ton of carbon relative to kilowatt hours if I'm looking at energy. That for me would be the right outcome. And then there's flexibility around thresholds that each jurisdiction can apply in terms of their ambition level. Thanks, Peter.
Perfect. Jose Luis?
Very brief. For those in your countries doing the same exercise, the taxonomy, I would advise you to focus your decision on science to avoid as much as possible the political economic pressure to cure taxonomic color blindness, confusing green with blue. Please, if you have this problem, go to the eye doctor because the science tells you what is green and what is not.
That's perfect. And closing point from Carol.
Thank you. For me, the most important thing about the taxonomy and also international is the fact that it gives a grammar. So it's not about the 400 pages delegated act and all the criteria. It's just a common grammar. 3 elements are very important in this grammar. First of all, it makes a difference between green and doing safe and harm. Second element is that it connects other environmental objectives as well. And we haven't talked much about adaptation, but it is super important that we take, we're now talking about the COP, that we take mitigation, adaptation in balance. And the third point, very much also made by Jose, and that is that we're using here science-based criteria and science-based thresholds. And these are key elements of this grammar. And I think that is an important point, because we now see that this grammar is taking on board internationally far beyond the EU as well. Thank you.
I don't think I can really add to that, and I think we're out of time. I would like to thank our panelists, our keynote speakers, and above all our audience, who have been very numerous. I think we've had a very, very high attendance at this session. We will endeavour to answer your questions on the chat. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you have further questions. That's what we're there for, and we very much hope to continue this conversation on a future occasion. Thank you very much, everyone, and wishing you a successful day at the COP and outside the COP as well. Thank you.